If you ever get rerouted through Mason Ridge at night, do not stop. Ever. It was an ordinary October night when the GPS blinked red and the voice said, "Rerouting." Ethan Cole had been driving rigs for a decade, long hauls through flat corn and mountain gaps. He trusted the math, miles, ETA, and the rumble of his engine. He did not trust superstition, not ever. Mason Ridge is the kind of road you don't find on travel blogs. A cracked two-lane wrapped in dead pine, a strip of asphalt that locals joke about until they cross their fingers. Ethan's load was lumber, his cab was warm, and the moon was a thin coin in a washed-out sky. So when the nav rerouted him, he sighed and followed the line of blue. The fog hit like a wall. Not the tired, wet fog you get rolling off a lake. This fog crawled. It sucked light and sound until his headlights were useless and the world beyond his hood was a matte, moving gray. He slowed. He should have turned around. He didn't. Something stood in the road. At first he thought deer until the shape stepped forward and revealed a boy. About 12, pale as a raw apple, still as a tombstone, Ethan slammed the brakes. The truck protested, metal whining against asphalt. He rolled down his window, breath steaming in the cold. "Hey, are you lost?" he called. The boy tilted his head. His eyes were wrong, no whites, no iris, just pits of endless black. The fog behind him moved differently, like someone had animated the air itself into a person. As Ethan watched, that fog figure reached out. Ethan drove around the boy, heart vibrating in his chest. In his rear view, his stomach dropped. The boy was smiling. The fog reached, two thin fingers of mist stretching toward his truck like hands. Farther down the road, headlights appeared, another vehicle. Relief slammed into Ethan so hard he laughed aloud. The truck glided closer. He flashed his brights. The vehicle kept coming. It was his truck. Same scuffs. Same broken running light, driving straight at him with impossible certainty. The crash tore him into blackness. He woke at dawn with a headache and a mouth full of sawdust-white air. His truck sat whole with the engine cold, not a dent. His dashcam, though, told a different story. Footage of a pale boy in the passenger seat, smiling into the camera. The last frame before the footage cut was the boy whispering, "Now you can never leave Mason Ridge." That whisper showed up on Ethan's phone that night at 12:13 a.m. And the picture attached. The boy was standing closer. Pictures at midnight aren't friendly, they're warnings. Ethan thought he'd wake up from that nightmare. He didn't. At exactly 12:13 a.m., his phone chimed, an unknown number, a photo. Mason Ridge, empty road, fog curling like fingers. The boy wasn't in that first picture. The next night's image had him standing farther down the asphalt. By the third night, the boy was in the foreground, tiny and grainy, smiling directly at the lens. 3 days later, the unknown number sent a video. 3 seconds. Fog. The same dead pines passing by. Then the boy's thin silhouette stepped into frame and stared straight into the phone's camera as if he knew exactly who watched. Ethan's chest felt hollow. He threw his phone across the room. A knock came at his window that night, not a knock, really. A soft, gloved tap. Ethan lived on the second floor. He looked up. Nothing. Then small, pale fingerprints slid down the glass. Prints that were wet and left a trail like someone had pressed their hands just behind the pane. Ethan drove to Sheriff Hartley the next morning, a man whose patience had been carved by years of quiet violence and worse weather. Hartley listened, then told Ethan the name, Caleb Mason. 30 years earlier, a boy named Caleb vanished on Mason Ridge. The searchers smelled fog until they lost their bearings. One moment, Caleb's footprints tracked in a straight line. The next, they stopped, as if he'd climbed a stair that led to nowhere. "You spoke to him?" Hartley asked flatly. Ethan's throat closed. "Once," he admitted. Hartley's face went still. "Once you speak, it knows you," he said. Not like a curse, like a tag. It can follow the voice. It moves through fog, through reflection, through anything that copies sound. That night, another message came at 12:13. Not a photo, a video. The boy leaned in close to the camera so Ethan could see his black eyes and whispered one phrase, "Come back." Ethan's truck keys felt heavy in his pocket. The road had followed him home, quiet, patient, insistent. The next file was different. A live photo that froze on a doorway Ethan recognized, his driveway. And in the motion frame, something much bigger than a boy turned its head. The sheriff believes in two things, evidence and survival. He didn't believe in ghosts until today. Sheriff Hartley had a way of making you feel both small and ridiculous before he spoke plainly. He told Ethan more than the missing person report. He shared the town's memory. Caleb Mason had been fragile, Hartley said. A quiet kid with a laugh like a match struck, small and dangerous if handled wrong. In a time the town wasn't proud of, someone chose a scapegoat and left Caleb on the ridge. They came back, Hartley said. Not the people, something else. The fog holds things now. We call it the ridge because things come back to it. Hartley handed Ethan an old Polaroid. A blurred image of a boy under a street lamp, black eyes smudged by age. People say the ridge keeps what it wants. Back at his apartment, Ethan replayed the dashcam footage frame by frame. There were details he hadn't seen. A smear on the passenger seat like oil. A glint of something metallic under the boy's collar. The boy on the camera, Caleb, mouthed words Ethan couldn't hear, and the audio track held a low frequency under the static, like someone humming a note that lives below conversation. That night, Ethan woke to a whisper in his living room, not from his phone. A voice so faint it could have been the heating system, and yet it called his name with a child's importunate tenderness. He followed the sound to find his television on. Grainy footage played, Mason Ridge again. Fog, trees, a path leading away into black. Across the screen, a shape moved and a message scrawled over the static. "Turn around." Ethan didn't. He felt watched, measured, as if the ridge itself was calibrating him. On his porch lay a dog tag he didn't own. Caleb Mason, letters etched through rust. He had not left his house. He had not walked the ridge. Yet something had carried a memory to his doorstep. The next night, the dog tag was gone, and in its place, a small, folded note slid under his door. "You opened the door. We followed. When something knocks slowly, 3 times, you don't ignore the rhythm." Ethan's night stopped belonging to him. He slept in ragged edges, eyes glassy by day. Every sight and sound carried the possibility of an echo. The town felt thinner, as though every living thing had been sketched and then erased around Mason Ridge. At 12:13 a.m., the unknown number sent a recording. Static breathing. The boy's voice came threaded through it, soft, childish, pleading. "Come back," he murmured. Then another voice joined, something low, like a radio played through a tin can. It repeated slowly, "You never left." That same night, Ethan heard the barefoot shuffle on his porch, the gait of a child. He moved to the window and watched fog lap at the bottom of his stairs like salt water. There was movement in the fog like a shape kneeling, pressing its palms to the wood. The doorknob turned extremely slowly, so slowly it could have been a trick of light. A pale hand slipped into the gap and tapped, a mockery of polite knocks. Tap, tap, tap. When the fingers retreated, footsteps padded away down the porch. The TV blinked to life again. On the screen was not Mason Ridge this time, but an angle Ethan knew too well. His house, seen through a lens at night. The camera framed his living room. For a second, he saw himself sitting there, and then the feed stuttered. The boy was standing in the next room, and his head turned toward Ethan's screen as though noticing him watching. He backed away slowly, phone in hand. The messages kept coming. Photos, short clips, live images where the motion always captured something else in the background. Long limbs, the suggestion of a tall shape bending around a tree. The texts read like instructions or threats. "Open the door, he wants to talk to you." Ethan woke to find his front door open, fog on the threshold, and a metal dog tag on the floor. There was a smell with it, wet earth and pine smoke. He slammed the door and bolted every lock. He could feel eyes moving behind the fog as if the woods were breathing him in. The next entry on his phone was a live photo taken from his living room, with the camera pointing straight at his couch. In the image, someone else was already sitting where he always sat. The boy who haunts Mason Ridge is small. The thing behind him is not. The basement was the only place Ethan considered safer, the house's core below the reach of windows. He hid there when the sounds of the house changed from knocks to something heavier. He expected empty concrete and boxes. He found carvings. Symbols had been scrawled into the underside of the stairs. Circles and lines that looked blurred if you stared too long, like a memory trying to be sketched. A chair sat in the center of the room, broken and roped, as if someone had staged a scene in the dark. Near the chair lay a dented nameplate. CALEB Mason, 1994. Ethan didn't believe in exorcisms or old-world rituals, but the room had a pressure, like a held breath. When he lifted his phone's light, shadows didn't match the shelves. Something in the basement absorbed light and then vomited it out as motion. A whisper came from the corner. The boy stood there, unexpectedly small and nearer than Ethan had seen on any video. Up close, Caleb's skin was as thin as paper and cold as lake water, but his voice had a tremor, an urgency that wasn't ghostly so much as grounded in fear. "You can't stay here," Caleb said. "He doesn't take what's already here. He wants what left." Ethan asked the obvious question, "Who is he?" Caleb's black eyes glowed a faint ember. "He's the thing that guarded the ridge. He kept something locked. People never understood. Then they hurt me and the ridge took me. Now he wants what was taken back." The basement light flickered and then blew. The door handle above turned with a force that made the building moan. Ethan heard the slow drag of something massive on the other side of the door, like earth sliding across wood. Caleb moved closer and warned him, "Don't scream, don't breathe like you're alive. Sometimes he finds us by sound." Ethan tried to understand the rules of this thing, how to survive under the house of a boy who had died decades ago. Caleb couldn't leave his place in the fog. He couldn't, apparently, stop trying to help. Then the basement door burst open and something huge filled the staircase, limbs too long, joints that made the wood shudder. Its breath smelled like old smoke and wet soil. It leaned forward, whispering with the voice of someone who'd been swallowed by the dark for a long time. "You should have stayed." When Ethan and Caleb bolted to the stairs, the creature's hand wrapped around Ethan's ankle, cold as shadow, pulling him back. Caleb screamed and pulled with all his strength. That scream changed everything. Fear is a simple machine. If you pull hard enough, it breaks something. The creature's grip on Ethan's ankle felt like ice and iron. The world narrowed to the squeal of wood and the boy's howls. Caleb's small hands dug into Ethan's jacket like an anchor. For a moment, the two of them were tethers holding together the last of the house's sanity. Ethan kicked, felt the scrape of splintered stair under his toes, and managed to wrench free. He tumbled into the hallway with Caleb at his shoulder. The creature slammed its vast frame against the door with a sound that shook the drywall. Dust fell like ash. For a breathless second, Ethan thought they'd made it, but the house had teeth. Windows popped and the fog leaked through the cracks like smoke. On the living room floor lay a small metal object, something Ethan recognized as the hood ornament from his own rig. It flickered there like a piece of evidence, a signature. The ridge was playful. Caleb tugged at Ethan and said, "You have to take him back. You have to go where I couldn't." "Where?" Ethan choked. "I'm not going back." "You already left," Caleb whispered. "That's why he's looking for you. He follows what crosses the line." Ethan realized with the horrible clarity of someone who's read a warning and ignored it that he'd spoken to the boy. That voice had been an invitation and a marker. The creature wanted him because he had a thread tied to the ridge, not because he deserved it, but because it needed a place to stand. They fled to his truck, crashing through the front door into the night. The fog slithered across the yard like an animal and pooled at the driveway in a corridor that pointed toward Mason Ridge. The engine stalled as the creature placed a hand on the dashboard, a grotesque mockery of a passenger. Its voice came through the cracked radio, low and layered as though many bemoans spoke together. "Return what was taken." Ethan wrestled to turn the key. The truck obeyed on its own, rolling forward as though guided. He fought the wheel, tried to drive out of the radius of that dark force. The truck obeyed for a breath, then jerked toward the path, the road that would lead him back to Mason Ridge. As the truck rolled toward the ridge, Ethan realized he wasn't driving back. He was being driven. And at the heart of Mason Ridge, something waited with lanterns like funeral lights. The ridge doesn't just guard things, it keeps promises. Some are mercy, some are traps. The road into Mason Ridge was different at night now. The fog had texture like velvet with barbs. Lanterns hung between trees, dozens of them, swinging as if guided by invisible hands. They formed a corridor not for travelers but for offerings. Ethan's truck rolled between those lights like an animal through a gate. At the center, the air hung still. The boy stood at the roadside, closer than before, and his eyes glowed with ember light. Behind him, the creature took a stance like a sentinel, tall and skeletal, limbs too long for a human frame. "You brought him back," the boy said in a voice that had no heat. "Now finish what you started." Ethan felt the weight of the ridge's history. He was a stranger who'd walked into a story that wasn't his, and yet it was. The boy pointed toward a collapse, a cellar door half swallowed by roots and char. Blackened planks and rusted nails made a ruin that the town pretended not to notice. It was the place Caleb had been left. "You have to go down," the boy said. "It isn't about killing him. It's about finishing the ledger." "You expect me to climb into a hole where a child died?" Ethan barked. He heard how small that sounded right away. Caleb's smile cracked. No mercy, only the simple, bleak clarity of someone who'd already been through the worst. "I can't leave," he said. "I tried. I couldn't. You can." Ethan found himself walking toward the cellar, boots crunching on pine needles, the lanterns watching. The stairs groaned as he descended into a place the sun had forgotten. The air smelled like iron and old smoke. Symbols covered the walls, circles cut with a steady hand, talon marks, spirals that tugged at the edge of sanity. At the center of the room sat a chair, broken and tied, the place where the ledger had been kept. A nameplate lay in the dirt, Caleb Mason, 1994. Ethan's hands trembled when he picked it up. As he reached for the carved mark on the wall, the one the boy had said kept the ridge tethered, a voice behind him said, "You shouldn't. It holds him." Ethan's fingers struck the carving. The sound made the room feel smaller. The mark cracked, a line through a circle. The air screamed. The ground under Ethan split open like an old wound, and something enormous, older than Mason Ridge, began to pull itself from beneath the soil. Sometimes breaking a chain doesn't free you. It frees the thing chained. When the symbol cracked, the cellar became a theater of ruin. The carved light pulsed white and the dirt convulsed. The creature howled, not in anger but in terror, because as the mark fractured, the bond it held loosened. From the split in the earth rose something wrong. Not the creature, bigger, older, and unfathomable, an absence shaped into hunger. It was blacker than the shadow that had stalked Ethan, and when it moved, the house seemed to forget how to stand. A massive, grasping limb surged up and wrapped around the creature's leg, dragging it toward the rift like a fish on a net. The boy's face changed. The ember light in his eyes flared up and then went hollow. "You freed him," he said softly. "Not us." A deep heartbeat echoed from below the pit. Hartley's old warnings whispered in Ethan's ears. The ridge had been a guard, not a prison. The mark had been a lid. By breaking it, Ethan had lifted the lid. The massive thing pulled the creature down with a violence that shook the rafters. For a moment, the creature screamed in an ungodly chorus that vibrated through bone. Then it was gone below the earth, shredded by roots and dark. Silence followed, a thin, trembling silence. The boy, the burned woman who flickered like a dying film, and the symbols on the walls seemed to recoil. The boy whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." Ethan felt triumph and dread braid together. He had fought back, and in doing so, he had freed something the ridge had guarded for reasons no one had told. From the crack emerged a motion, an ink-black slither that tasted like the inside of a grave. It did not belong to earth or sky. The cellar vibrated with a slow, terrible rhythm, thump, thump, like a heart waking after a long sleep. As the pit breathed, a low message vibrated through Ethan's pocket. His phone lit up with an image. The road outside empty, except for something taller than the trees turning its head toward the camera. You can run from a road. You can't run from a thing that learned your name. Ethan burst from the cellar into a night that had rearranged itself. The fog outside was different, veins of black running through it like ink in milk. He ran to his truck and started the engine. This time the ridge didn't push. The truck obeyed, the road opened like a throat. He drove until dawn peeled the sky into a soft blue, and the town felt safe in its smallness. He changed his number, his plates, his clothes. He moved a state away and kept the dog tag wrapped in a dish under his bed, as if its rusted metal could anchor him to the life he wanted. For a week, nothing happened. He went to work doing fuel deliveries and tried to breathe like a person who didn't belong to a story. He laughed in the company break room and watched TV. The edges of his days were dull like a blade that's been put away. Then at 12:13 a.m., a message arrived from an unknown number. The photo showed Mason Ridge. Black fog pooled at the horizon. The text. He found the one who broke the mark. Ethan's chest tightened. A live photo came next. The camera frame shifted, and in the motion, something enormous rose, taller than the trees, limbs like broken spires. The next message read, "He's coming tonight." That night outside his apartment, the sky blackened not with cloud but with fog. It moved without wind, a slow crawl that erased the stars. Ethan locked every bolt and hid where light could reach. When the knock finally came, it was 3 times, tap, 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 the same rhythm he'd heard in the cellar. The door shuddered. Through the keyhole, he saw a smear of black pressing against the glass like a face trying to be born. The last message before the lights went out was simple and terrible. "Mason Ridge has come to you." Some endings are doors. Others are traps disguised as doors. The fog poured into his apartment like ink spilled from a jar. It found cracks in the windows and seeped under the door. The house no longer felt like a house. It felt like a throat. Ethan clutched the dog tag to his palm until the metal bit a crescent into his skin. He had hours, maybe minutes. He had to choose. Voices filled the room, too many now, layered and distant. Caleb's voice was close, impossibly close, saying, "You can send him back. You broke him out. You can push him back." Ethan remembered the carving, the circle with the vertical line, how his fingers had struck it, and how the sound had opened a wound under the earth. He had no ritual, no priest, no plan. only instinct and the knowledge that the ridge had been a guard, not an evil in itself. He grabbed his truck keys and ran outside, the fog hugging his heels. Lantern light glowed deep in the trees like watchful eyes. At the edge of the road, he found the cellar door again, the wound he had made. The pit breathed in slow, patient gulps. Ethan set the dog tag on the cracked mark and spoke out loud, for the first time accepting that words might matter in the wrong kind of world. He said Caleb's name, called it like an offering. He told whatever listened that it had what it sought and that he would undo what he had done. The air tightened. The black fog pulled like a tide. The massive thing that had been freed rose, glistening with the memory of being caged. It loomed and then, very carefully, like something tasting air, exhaled. There was a moment when the world held its breath. The creature leaned toward the dog tag and in a blink that felt like an eternity, reached and took it. The dog tag vanished into blackness. Caleb's face appeared in the fog, not smiling now but peaceful somehow, a release in a look that had been denied him for decades. The shadow receded, folding like cut cloth into the crack. The lanterns swung and then guttered out. Ethan collapsed on his knees in the dirt, hands black with ash and soil. The house behind him was quiet. The ridge, for now, was still. He died later in small things. A restless night, the sense of being watched from the corner of the road, a message at 12:13 that contained an old Polaroid of a boy walking away. But for now, he lived. He packed his life into a car and left. He never drove toward Mason Ridge again. On a cold night, a driver swore he heard a child whisper from his dashcam, "Now you can never leave." The recording still exists. The timestamp reads 12:13 a.m. If you ever get a message from an unknown number at that time, don't open it. And if you must, don't say anything back.